The USMC KA-BAR knife isn't just a blade, it's an icon. It's a symbol carried into battle, whispered about in training camps, and passed down from Marines to sons and daughters like a sacred relic. But while countless people recognize its shape, few truly know the untold truth hiding behind the steel. This is not just a story about a knife. It's a story of survival, betrayal, secrecy, and war. Today, you're going to discover facts that almost no one talks about. Details that reveal why the KA-BAR became the Marine Corps' trusted companion, and why it almost never existed in the first place. If you think you already know the KA-BAR, think again, because what you're about to hear might completely change how you see this legendary weapon forever. Before the KA-BAR, the Marines didn't actually have a standard-issue combat knife. Soldiers and Marines carried whatever they could find: Bowie knives, civilian hunting knives, or the Army's M1917 Bola. But none of these blades were designed for both fighting and utility. Many were too bulky, too fragile, or simply not suited for the brutal demands of war. Early in World War II, Marines in the Pacific realized quickly that their knives were failing them. Jungle warfare required hacking through vegetation, digging, prying open crates, and yes, sometimes close combat. The existing knives bent, broke, or rusted in tropical conditions. Morale suffered, and the Corps needed a new weapon. But what most people don't know is that the knife that would become the KA-BAR wasn't originally designed by the Marines at all. It came from a small company fighting for survival back home in America. One of the most mysterious parts of the KA-BAR's story is its strange name. Many people assume KA-BAR stands for Kill a Bear. That's partially true, but the real story is even weirder. Back in the 1920s, a fur trapper wrote a letter to the Union Cutlery Company describing how his gun jammed while hunting, and he was forced to kill a wounded bear with only his knife. The letter was nearly illegible, but the fragment KA-BAR was clear enough for the company to read. Union Cutlery trademarked the term KA-BAR as a symbol of a knife's rugged reliability. It became their brand. But here's the secret. When the Marine Corps adopted the knife, they chose it not just for quality, but because the name already carried a reputation of toughness. The idea that a knife could kill a bear fueled the legend and marketing that followed. A piece of random scribble in a letter turned into a legend that would follow. Marines for generations. In 1942, with World War II raging, the Marines demanded a blade that could do everything. It had to be strong enough to fight an enemy in hand-to-hand combat, but also versatile enough for camp chores, survival tasks, and emergency repairs. The military needed something sharp, durable, affordable, and easy to mass produce. Union Cutlery's KA-BAR prototype fit the bill. It featured a 7-inch clip-point blade, a stacked leather handle for grip even when wet, and a steel pommel that could double as a hammer. It was lighter than the Army's existing knives, but just as deadly in combat. The Marines were skeptical at first, because no one wanted to change tradition during wartime. But desperate times called for new solutions. And so, the KA-BAR entered Marine Corps history. Yet very few people realize how much behind-the-scenes fighting went into getting it officially adopted. Here's something almost nobody knows. Before the KA-BAR was approved, the Marines put it through brutal tests. It wasn't enough for it to simply look good on a belt. The Corps demanded proof it could survive war. They bent the blades sideways in vices until they nearly snapped. They hammered them into wooden crates, used them as pry bars, and tested the knives by stabbing through layers of leather, webbing, and even sheet metal to simulate enemy gear. The knives were soaked in salt water to mimic Pacific conditions and checked for rust and edge retention. Many competing knives failed. The KA-BAR didn't. It not only passed it, outperformed every knife tested. That's when the Marine Corps knew they'd found a blade that could be trusted in the jungle, in the mud, and in close quarters combat. But even after proving itself, there was still pushback. The U.S. Army initially rejected the KA-BAR for mass issue. Some Army officials believed the knife was too big for standard infantrymen and insisted on sticking with smaller, utility knives. The Marines, however, ignored the Army's hesitation. They adopted the KA-BAR and issued it widely. Marines on Pacific islands like Guadalcanal and Iwo Jima swore by it. Word spread quickly through letters home and battlefield reports, and eventually, Army soldiers began trying to get their hands on KA-BARs through unofficial channels. Private purchases skyrocketed. By late 1943, even the Army started quietly purchasing KA-BARs for certain units. The truth is, while it became the Marine knife, soldiers all over the military wanted it. The KA-BAR wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of toughness and American ingenuity. And it all started because the Marines refused to settle for second-rate gear. Look closely at a KA-BAR blade, and you'll see a groove running along the flat of the blade. Many people call it a blood groove, claiming it helps blood flow out of a wound so the knife doesn't get stuck during a stab. That's a myth. The real name is a fuller, and its purpose is structural. The fuller lightens the blade without sacrificing strength, making the knife easier to handle and maneuver. It also reduces the amount of steel needed, which was crucial during wartime shortages. The blood groove story spread because it sounded tough and made the knife seem more deadly. But the truth is purely practical. The fuller is an engineering choice, not a gruesome combat feature. Yet to this day, many knife fans and even some veterans still believe the bloody legend. That's one of the biggest untold truths hiding in plain sight on every KA-BAR. One of the untold truths about the KA-BAR is how much it was used for everything but fighting. Marines in the Pacific used it to dig foxholes, open ration cans, cut ropes, shave kindling for fires, and pry open ammo crates. Soldiers even used the pommel as a hammer for tent stakes. In many letters home, Marines wrote that the KA-BAR felt more like a lifeline than a weapon. Some Marines said they went entire campaigns without ever stabbing an enemy, but they used their C-bar every single day. That's why veterans often describe the knife with deep emotion. It wasn't just for killing, it was for surviving. And that's a side of the KA-BAR story that rarely makes it into movies or documentaries. A knife was as much a tool of life as a weapon of war. Another untold side of the KA-BAR's history is how often it saved lives, not by fighting, but through improvisation. Marines used KA-BARs to cut tourniquets, perform emergency surgery, and free wounded comrades trapped under debris. There are documented cases where Marines used the knife to dig out soldiers buried alive by shell explosions. In many respects, the KA-BAR became a medic's unofficial tool. Even though it was designed for combat, it often proved its worth as a life-saving instrument. This dual role of destruction and rescue gave the knife a complex legacy. To some, it's a weapon. To others, it's a symbol of hope. And that duality is one of the untold truths that makes the KA-BAR not just a military artifact, but a piece of human history. Today, the KA-BAR is still in production, nearly unchanged from its World War II design. It's become a favorite among hunters, survivalists, and collectors. The Marine Corps continues to issue it to certain units, and it's also popular with Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and other elite forces. The knife's status as a cultural icon means it shows up in movies, TV shows, and video games, often portrayed as the ultimate badass blade. But most of those portrayals never mention the real stories behind the steel. They don't show the saltwater tests, the engineering secrets, or the desperate need that birthed the KA-BAR in the jungles of the Pacific. That's the untold truth that lives beneath the surface of every KA-BAR blade. It's more than just a weapon. It's a story of American ingenuity, Marine Corps grit, and the brutal realities of war. If you talk to veterans, many will tell you that KA-BAR isn't just a piece of gear, it's a symbol of their service. Some Marines keep their original knives for decades, passing them down like family heirlooms. The scratches on the blade, the worn leather handle, the faded markings all tell the story. The knife carries memories of friends lost, victories won, and moments of raw survival. For many, it's the one object that connects them to who they were during the most intense years of their lives. This emotional weight is part of why the KA-BAR endures, even in an age of high-tech weapons. It's a simple tool, forged in an era of total war, but it holds more meaning than most modern gadgets ever could. And that's one of the most powerful truths people rarely talk about. True story of a Marine and his KA-BARON. Of the most compelling real stories about the KA-BAR comes from a young Marine named Private First Class Richard Johnson, who fought in the jungles of Bougainville during World War II. He wrote a letter to his family describing the night his platoon was pinned down under heavy Japanese machine gun fire. With communications cut off and supplies running low, Johnson had to crawl through thick mud and tangled vines to reach an isolated squad that hadn't received fresh water or ammunition for 2 days. He carried only his rifle, a few canteens, and his KA-BAR. As he moved under darkness, he used the knife to silently cut through barbed wire and dense underbrush without making noise that would alert enemy sentries. When he finally reached the stranded Marines,